Now we're streaming live on Facebook. Good morning, Amanda Iovino, WPA Intel. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Well, intrigued by all the polling that's going on. A lot of people are taking comfort on the Trump side that, oh, well, George H.W. Bush was down by 17 at this point in 1988. Donald Trump was down by similar margins back just 4 years ago. So everyone thinks all the polls are wrong, and that the triumph of the Trump administration in re-election is imminent. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think this is a very different dynamic, especially with the pandemic. So why don't you take a few seconds to introduce yourself and what WPA Intel does, and then we'll jump into your slide deck this time around.
Sure. So my name is Amanda Iovino. I'm a senior client strategist over at WPA. We are a polling and modeling firm, mostly working with candidates on the right and some corporate and nonpartisan groups as well. But we're working with a lot of candidates this cycle and tracking everything. And to your point just now, I would caution people not that polls are wrong, but polls are often snapshots in time and aren't very good at projecting forward, which is why good campaigns also use analytics and modeling.
Right.
So let me jump into what we've got this week. Wanted to start here with Trump's job approval. Setting the stage. Just to know, because we're going to dive into a lot of how voters, especially in Virginia, feel about the economy, and want to distinguish how they feel about President Trump and how he's handled the economy versus how they feel about how he's handled his job overall. So looking here, since pretty much when he stepped foot in the White House, he has had a net negative approval rating, right? Currently, it's not even at the worst it's been overall, but it is at a low point for the past couple of years. It's currently
let's take a look, if we can, Amanda, at the proximity to the 2018 election cycle and the 2020 election cycle. It seems to be replicable.
It does. It is fairly close. On the overall approval side, I think his net disapproval is a little bit higher than it was. There was probably some static here at this point in time. But then he had generally improved and was at not necessarily a terrible spot pre-pandemic.
Right.
So, I do think, and the trend line here looks that his approval numbers seem to be at least stabilizing, not necessarily getting any worse, and even bouncing back a little bit.
So, but if you look at the inflection points there, it's pretty obvious. If you were to go back in time, where it was the narrowest and where it has gone from there. If you just drew a straight line from the bottom, the most recent bottom to the most recent high on the disapproval, and the most recent high on the approval to disapproval, you'd see just the divergence. That's where it happened.
Right around the pandemic, and he got a little bit of a boost in approval at the beginning of the pandemic, which would probably be about here. Like we talked about a couple weeks ago, a lot of governors, a lot of leaders got a bit of a boost, but his has declined, which can be an issue of polarization or about how he's handled his job specifically. I'd let the comms crew on each of the side of the campaign kind of battle that one out. But wanted to point out here before we jump into the next slide that he's really generally been net negative on his approval throughout his presidency.
Well, he was a net negative when he won, right? He lost by 3 million votes and I hate to point that out to Trump, the strongest Trump supporters, because they think he won by an overwhelming margin. He barely won in 2016 in 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. 2 of those 3 had Republican governors. Now they're all Democratic governors, and that's going to matter on how things are presented in a daily existence in those states.
But looking a little bit more at his approval on the economy, it's significantly better than it is on his job approval overall. Now there's a few explanations for that. I think you have more Democrats, independents, and even some Republicans who do not want to approve of the president and how he's handling the job overall. how he reacts on Twitter, stuff like that. But when you're asking them about the economy, they kind of take a little bit of the personality aspect out of whether they approve or disapprove. Wanted to look specifically at the trend line of this Fox News poll. Currently in July, so July 12th through the 15th, they had it at a tie. Now, just to kind of backtrack, where that poll showed approval earlier this year, in January, he was at a high point in his presidency, 56% approved on how he was handling the economy. In February, that was 54%. It really took a dive in June, and he was actually in the Fox News poll net negative on the economy, 39% approve, 46% disapprove. So this is already, the trend line is bouncing back. So there seems to be that there was an inflection point kind of at the end of June. Now, whether that holds or not, and that trend line continues or not is anybody's guess, but wanted to again point out that people are more likely to approve of his handling of the economy than they are of his handling of his job overall.
Well, but then again, this is a big breakout section here, because he's going to want to run on, frankly, what got him elected. I mean, he was going to be strong on the economy, changing our economic position in the world, more of a nationalist, populist economic message, anti-globalism, against China. This was a shift, especially for free trade Republicans. And this was the dynamic in the 2016 election, apart from being obviously many voters voting against Hillary Clinton. But this has to be his wheelhouse that he's going to run on, and to have an improving economy going into the voting time, and I'm not just talking about November 3rd, but basically the 45 days leading up to that, when early voting starts all across the country. I mean, I think a lot of people would vote today if they could, both for and against President Trump, obviously. But this is going to be his wheelhouse, and I think the juxtaposition of this and the cognitive ability of Vice President Biden are going to be key deciding points for people to go, I don't really like Trump again, but I'm going to vote for him on the economy because I think he'll bring us back. And I think that's definitely going to be where he's going to have to go. And I think we're in a position now in our society, Amanda, and correct me if I'm wrong or you think otherwise, is that we live in an a la carte society, and you can pick and choose any number of different reasons to vote for someone to, and sort of justify it. Well, I don't like everything about this person, but I like this one aspect, therefore I'll vote for that. Not the person, but for that. Mm-hmm. I think that's what we've seen in the last couple of cycles. But the overwhelming anti-Trump wave, especially in Virginia, of the 17, 18, and 19 cycles is obvious in swing states and suburban areas. So they just don't like the man. So if he's going to make a push into suburban swing voters, it's going to have to be on the economy.
I agree with that. I think you had single issue voters for a long time, and I think you're seeing that kind of bleed into more of the independents, whereas you used to see it more with the partisans in primary season.
Right. Okay.
So looking at that point, handling of the economy, this is from Morning Consult, so the trend lines are slightly different than what we just showed. But Biden is gaining voters' trust in the economy. I disagree with the headline slightly here. When you're talking about it being a binary choice between Trump and Biden, any dip for Trump is going to be a correlating increase for Biden. Looking at the partisans, you can see Democrats actually give him a little bit more of trust than Republicans give Biden. The swing in the last month or two has really been among independents. And to your point just now, that he needs to go back and convince these swing voters that he is the best to handle the economy.
That's a very dangerous, I don't know if you call that a crosstab, not a deep one anyway. This is more of an obvious one. If independents were plus 12 on Biden in the economy back in June, and now they're a -6, that's a swing of 18 points with not a lot of attention being brought to this, frankly. I mean, no one's talking about the economy and Joe Biden not being good at it. They're talking about, well, he doesn't come out much, and the things he says and works around social media are kind of shocking. But this is, and I don't think he's picking someone, frankly, for VP who can bolster the argument that this person, either it's Kamala Harris or Susan Rice, or I'm hearing are the headliners or the head of the pack anyway, and Elizabeth Warren, God help us. They're not economically strong. So independents here are a critical factor, and that's where, you know, Biden is winning nationally, huge numbers compared to 4 years ago.
Yeah, I do think that this specifically, because we talked about kind of that trend line in the Fox News poll, is a bit of a lagging indicator on how voters are approving of President Trump, and how they're viewing the economy as a whole. It's like we kind of said as we were looking at the last slide, in June, kind of the late June Fox poll was kind of the low point of the approval on President Trump's handling of the economy, and it has since increased in July. So I do think that this might, you know, from a -6 points, this might go back to a tie. And again, it depends on how the economy is moving forward, whether or not he can gain steam. And to the point of who Biden picks, the only one that you kind of mentioned there that I do think might have an impact on Biden's handling of the economy would be Warren, because of her push for more populist and more known on economic policy.
She speaks authoritatively on the economy. It doesn't mean she's right. I don't think she is. I think she's dangerous in a lot of areas. Not to say she's entirely wrong either. I mean, there's some instinctive problems in our financial markets. I don't disagree with that. But getting back to this data point here, that is a huge move. If you look at the other 3 boxes, there's no movement.
No.
The movement is in independence on the economy in just the last month.
Yep.
Huge move. I mean, it's a huge move.
It is. And like I said, I'm going to be very curious to see what the next months here look like, to see if it's truly a lagging indicator on the data point that we just talked about, which is the Trump's job approval.
You know when this one was taken? July?
I think it was early July.
The early July. We're at the end of July. The next Fox News poll, that's the one we got to focus on.
Yeah.
Okay. Not that Fox is great. It's just a baseline of information. Fair? I mean, because everyone's going to go, oh, it's Fox News. They're so slanted. They're not slanted. They have it as a tie.
The polling is not slanted. So wanted to drill a little bit on Virginia and look at how Virginians are viewing the state of the national economy. So as we were kind of talking about kind of national implications of this, remember that Virginia is considered a likely Democrat state, not necessarily a toss-up state in this election. Right. So this is going to look, the more toss-up states and the redder the states are going to look, we can infer that these economic conditions are going to be a little bit better in those states. Right. But we're in Virginia, so let's talk about Virginia. You can see a strong inflection point from when President Trump was first elected, Election Day 2016, a strong increase in people who thought the condition of the national economy right now was fairly good and very good. These numbers both kind of climbed. Very bad and fairly bad declined to pretty much their low points after President Obama after his term ended.
Right.
And these numbers, that trend was consistent throughout President Trump's first term until you got to the coronavirus stock crash, in which case very good plummeted, very bad, fairly bad jumped up. But then right around the time of the April jobs report, fairly good started increasing again. So now you've got a mix of about a third, and a third of very bad, and fairly good. So overall, this is still, the economy is not great. Our Virginians are not viewing the national economy as great. It's 61%, either very or fairly bad. But the number of people who are saying it's fairly good is actually better than it was kind of in the beginning of April.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see those inflection points, isn't it? I mean, the jobs report, the good news, it wasn't the fact that people saw it every day. It's what they were shown to be universal in the American economy, is that the jobs report was actually pretty good for April, and it changed people's perception.
Yep. And then this line is the May jobs report, and you can see the trend line stopped and it stabilized after the May jobs report.
What happened there?
I believe it just wasn't the same positive momentum that we had seen in the April jobs report.
Was that also the time of the George Floyd killing?
I think it was a little bit later in May.
So, but you had the stalling of that report because it wasn't accelerated past that initial decline. So people got a better feeling on that, but it hasn't really, it was sort of stabilized. But I also think, look, a lot of people went on vacation. A lot of people went to the beach. A lot of people's view of the world changes at summertime. It's time that, the kids are driving us crazy. Let's go outside, move around a little bit more hopeful. But I think the mission is going to see what happens coming in some of these August polls.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
So as I was looking at this data, the really interesting thing that I saw was the difference between how men and women are looking at the economy, the current condition. So both of them had the same inflection point, right, of the coronavirus stock crash. But after the April jobs report, the men's trend line, a plurality are saying that it's fairly good, 33%. Again, overall, a majority are still saying that it's in the very bad or fairly bad category. But a plurality of men in Virginia think that the national economy is actually fairly good. Women, 66% say either very bad or fairly bad, and fairly good is in the third ranking here.
So this is really important, similar to the independent breakout and their changes, the fairly good and the fairly bad. Can you drill down on this and see by marital status among women, meaning are single women more pessimistic on, and single women, single mothers, more pessimistic on the national economy than married women?
Not in this data. That's not a point that they give, but I do think that that's part of it. I think looking at this job market as a whole, there's been a lot of news that this has been a very female-focused recession. So by that, the hardest industries hit have been travel, tourism, hospitality, and those industries, women make up over 50% of the leisure category jobs. So the jobs that are being lost right now are mostly women's jobs. And then the other half of that, to your point, is that women, whether they are single or married, are reporting spending more time doing kind of the bulk of the childcare. Doing the homeschooling. There's actually a poll in May. 50% of men nationwide said that they were doing most of the homeschooling, and 3% of the women said that their husbands were doing most of the homeschooling.
What was this?
So yeah. So I think you're seeing women feeling like they're taking much more of the share of the burden of everything that's going on with the pandemic when it comes to households, chores, and homeschooling. And I think obviously whether kids go back to school is going to make a big impact on how these women are viewing their jobs. Women are more likely to be the ones to take a step back from their careers, go part-time, cut back hours for the sake of the family. And that I think would also have a pretty big impact on their view of the national economy come the fall.
I'd definitely like to see something broken out on single versus married in those breakouts there.
I'll try to find you those data points.
Get on it. Top talent for this stuff. It's not, we're kidding. We're not.
So that's how they feel about the economy right now. Looking at the direction of the economy overall, is it getting better or worse? And this is just kind of net. So you're seeing, this is more of the forward projection of voters in Virginia. So they have, since election day 2016, again, we're looking at inflection points, Virginians have thought the nation's economy is getting better. And with a couple of small dips here, generally it's been better until you get the coronavirus stock market crash. And then a deep bounce. It increased actually starting before the April jobs report, which has been interesting, seeing some preliminary indicators there. And then starting with the May jobs report, which now that I'm thinking about the timing, did come out right around the time of the George Floyd killing. We saw another negative inflection point there.
That's clear that that's the Memorial Day weekend there.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at it though, it's interesting how impacted we are by the news.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like people said, oh, my day got better because Donald Trump's elected. We're going to have a better economy. Oh, the tax law was signed. Gee, that made me, that I felt it immediately. These are these are cultural impacts of news, big news items.
And you brought up HW before. One of the things in the 92 election that we saw that it wasn't the actual numbers of the economy heading towards the fall where he lost to Clinton were rebounding. They were getting better, but the news about the economy was so negative, it informed people's perceptions. So in a lot of the forecasting models for elections, they actually take into account more of the news and the tone of the news about the economy as opposed to the actual underlying numbers when they're looking at how to forecast elections.
And this really shows some of the strong headwinds the Trump reelect faces because, let's be honest, 95% of the news media is against Donald Trump. I mean, it's factual. I mean, you saw the editorial boards 4 years ago, the constant negative reporting. It's not fake news, it's just news, but the negative cycle is so overwhelming for people. It's going to show up in these ups and downs in the polling. That's why it's even more difficult for Trump to get any traction on the economy, because anytime they do, they're going to try to slow it down and say it's much worse than it actually is. And I think that's what happened in '92 with Clinton. I think the media has been biased for a long time, and they're going to run with these stories. But then again, the Clinton team in '92 hit it right out of the park when it was the economy stupid. Right. That was their theme. And you had a third party in Ross Perot get 19% of the vote.
Factors going on.
Yeah, but now everyone's singing the praises of HW. Oh, he was a great guy, and what a wonderful person. Like, where were y'all in '92? I wrote in Jack Kemp that year anyway. So what are you gonna do?
So I also wanted to show again just a breakdown in gender. Sorry.
Were you even born in '92?
I was.
Okay.
So again, breaking this down by men and women. Men more positive overall, net better until you have the stock market crash. And there's actually this moment where men in Virginia said the economy was getting better before it kind of got worse. Whereas women have been much more negative about.
Is that the George Floyd inflection point?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And women throughout this year, frankly, have been, even pre-pandemic and 2019 as well, been more negative about the direction of the economy overall. And it's gotten much worse, clearly.
We also saw Joe Biden come out with something on childcare. That I think goes to that area in how women look at the economy and offering something as a solution for probably single women or women who feel like they're carrying more of the burden when it comes to raising children in this country.
I also think it's a factor of what data points men and women are looking at when it comes to what they consider the economy.
Right.
And I think we can look at that actually a little bit more in the next section, which is about family finances. So especially after 2008, what I was seeing a lot in the numbers then and in a lot of the focus groups and more qualitative work is that people were seeing the national economy get better. And they were seeing construction going on, they were seeing numbers improve, but they weren't necessarily feeling that in their own personal finances. Right. So they vote and were intending to vote and did vote based more on their personal finances than they were about the overall state of the economy. So over the last year, has your family's financial situation gotten better, gotten worse, or stayed about the same? And you can see it's been a strong increase in the president's first term of gotten better. From January 17, Inauguration Day, it was kind of a bit of an inflection point through the coronavirus pandemic. And then stayed the same has increased. Now, I don't know the policy in depth enough to go into this conversation, but this is, I believe that stayed about the same is as high as it is. It gotten worse is not higher because of the CARES Act. So as they fight about that on the national scene, these are the numbers that are going to have another inflection point depending on what they do.
Well, it's also the big one there, though, if you go back, if you can, is that the people thinking it got better went down significantly, and those who thought it went the same. So people, it looks like most of those people said from about the same, went higher than saying it got better. It didn't say it got worse. It just the outlook wasn't better.
Right. So again, breaking this down by men and women, you're seeing men inauguration day, net better all the way through. It's a strong correlation. With women, it took a little bit of time for them to start saying that it got better. Now, what I think is happening here is that right around starting on election day, which was the inflection point, and I'm making mass generalizations here, men are more likely to be the ones in the family that are looking at the stock market portfolio, looking at pensions and 401ks, which are all dependent upon the stock market. Women are more likely to be the ones dealing with the day-to-day, week-to-week grocery budgets, healthcare budgets. They're the ones that are paying the co-pays and prescription costs. I mean, the family is, but they're the ones that are actually writing the checks, right? So women are more likely to be looking at kind of those day-to-day expenses, whereas men are kind of looking a little bit, let's say, more long-term about their family's finances. So I think that has a lot to do with kind of the differences in how men and women in Virginia appear to be looking at their family finances. So you can see men have actually, in Virginia, have never said that it's net worse, even during the pandemic.
Right.
There's a decline right around the stock market decline, and then the stock market crash. You can see the stocks begin decline, also hits a bit of a decline here. Mm-hmm. On the men's side. Whereas women, there is a decline there as well. But again, it's never, the tax law being signed is actually a bigger inflection point than the stock market decline is with them. So all in all, I think if advising candidates right now, that I would advise them to be looking at their family finances numbers. Like, this is the question that I would have them ask on surveys to see where voters are.
Well, and also what words work in this time frame of, how are you going to address this going forward? What are the insecurities? What are they most concerned about? Just talking about this is going to be very difficult for some Republicans, actually. But the most recent reports are that the Trump folks aren't going to help out the House Republicans anyway. So you can lean into this one if you're a Republican member running for the House of Representatives. You're going to get the Trump vote anyway. So why wouldn't you get out there and say, let's just do some different things and at least poll it to find out what would move the needle?
Always advise polling it before you jump into it. But that's me. So the last thing I wanted to close out here is just talking about one of the national trends that we're seeing, which is anti-incumbency. So if we look at who has been losing, who has been losing in primaries thus far, we've got 5 congressmen, they're all men as of right now, who have lost their primaries. 3 on the Republican side, 2 on the Democrat side. There's another Democrat congresswoman in New York who might be added to this list, but it's been a month and they're still counting ballots. So it's its own mess going on right now.
All that great mail-in balloting.
Putting this in perspective, in 2018, 4 members of Congress lost their primaries. In 2016, 2 did, and in 2014, 5 did. And so we still have all of the August primaries to go. There's actually a big group of them coming up. So, this definitely could be added. There could be more added to this list. There's a tough Senate primary going on in Massachusetts that could actually be added to this list also, potentially. Now, taking out King on the Republican side, which is its own kind of issue, the other 4 members of Congress who lost to candidates on their flanks. So Riggleman lost to a more conservative candidate, nominally conservative. Tipton also lost to a more conservative candidate. Lipinski in Illinois on the Democrat side was the only pro-life Democrat left in their caucus, and he lost to a progressive candidate. And Engel also lost to a progressive candidate. And so what we're seeing, at least on the congressional level, is very much that the wings of the party are kind of going for a more ideologically pure party. And some of that is, you can see in the state legislatures also. Now, looking at the Republican side, I'm going to skip over some of these states that have lost like 1 or 2. In Montana, 6 incumbents lost their races. And that was stated to be a ideological purge of the party. Now, in West Virginia, you actually saw 10 members lose here, and the asterisk here is just to say that the state Senate president actually lost their primary. And also, I think a former majority leader lost the primary. So this isn't just first-term members losing for whatever reason. These are long-term incumbents who are losing. West Virginia, a number of them were actually primaried by teachers. There was a big education fight in West Virginia. So there's a mix of the ideological purity, but also an actual issue concern that kind of rallied up voters against incumbents. On the Democrat side, New Mexico and Pennsylvania both had a number of primaries, incumbents losing primaries. New Mexico, again, the Senate president and the head of I think it was the Finance Committee, lost. And all of these were to more progressive challengers. Okay. So we're seeing a big drive in polarization kind of starting to affect, at least very severely down ballot, and also up in the congressional ballot, kind of a push against incumbents, but from their ideological flanks for the most part.
And we saw that in Virginia ahead of this for the last several cycles.
You guys are always ahead of the game.
I know. No one wants to believe me.
So that's what we've got for this week. Overall, I think the economic indicators, I think as we kind of look towards Labor Day, those numbers and then the polling on the economic numbers is going to be an important kind of indication of how the election is going to play out.
The economic indicators are going to be the big ones, especially for independents. If independents see the economy getting better, and this is frankly where the tension is in the Trump administration, right? They want to keep the economy open. They want to keep things going. A lot of people want to shut down various sectors of the economy because of the spread of the virus, and people are trying to get vaccines out. I did notice yesterday that Moderna and Pfizer put out statements that they were in the final stages of their testing for their vaccines, and it was buried in the news.
Yeah,
that should have been like leading. I mean, you've got millions of people have been affected by this. I mean, hundreds of 150,000 people have died so far. You think that have been leading the news cycle, but it wasn't.
No, and I've also seen some polling that there are a lot of people who are hesitant to actually get the vaccine if and when it's produced. So maybe that'll be our topic next time.
Well, can you poll that?
There have been some public polls that have shown that people are there are concerns. So we'll go into that next time.
Someone's going to have concerns. I have concerns, right? I mean, but by the same token, if you're 81 like my father, chances are you're going to you can take a swing at that one, right?
Potentially, but there are portions of both the right and the left who are very hesitant to take any vaccine, even if it's offered. So I need to look more at those numbers and how those questions were worded. But there was a significant portion of people who were hesitant to take a vaccine.
What do you mean by significant, Amanda? WPA?
I think it was over half of people were saying that they were very hesitant to take the vaccine. But I want to go back and look at those polls, look at who sponsored it, and all of that stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, look at where we're in the cycle. No one wants to take an untested, unverified vaccine. If it comes back, these are safe, they're effective. People are going to go, oh, okay, right? I mean, first things first. A lot more people are going to be taking the flu vaccine this year, the flu shot. You would think.
You would hope.
Well, and then you're also going to have, frankly, foreign adversaries on social media pinging people all the time, stirring up this stuff on the vaccine. I mean, this was going to happen.
Yeah.
This is what's going to happen. And we keep falling for this, that I call it the crap trap. It's just what happens, right? We want to believe. I mean, I can't tell you the things I saw today on my Facebook feed this morning that were patently false and actually satirical, that people were posting as factual and being outraged. And I'm like, it actually says in the article, this is satire.
That's been going on for a while.
Well, we need to stop that crap.
Yeah.
This is
much more about the content than it is about the targeting, saying from someone who helps with the targeting. side of things. Facebook and Twitter need to focus more on what messages are being sent out as opposed to who is being
We should
targeted.
talk about that just for a couple seconds here, because obviously that's a big play in, campaign targeting. Saw last night where it was verified that the professor at UNCW, North Carolina, Wilmington, the professor shot himself, was conservative, was driven out of his office, fired, or forced to resign, and he killed himself, committed suicide. And I looked on the Twitter feed, and people were like happy that the man committed suicide. They were happy he was gone. And we're at this point in this country, we've lost all sense of, I think, common decency. And I don't know if that's going to play to Biden, because I don't think he can make that sale, because he's just, I don't think he's there as well as he would like to have been 20, 30 years ago. Obviously, the man's in cognitive decline, whether everyone wants to admit it or not. It's clear. But the fact of the matter is, our political divisions are so deep, and they're getting deeper, and there's no arresting of this moment. And I don't think we're going to get any better after the cycle, regardless of who wins.
I think the back and forth on Twitter, and it's a definite avenue for our adversaries, as you said, to kind of take advantage and to further kind of polarize the country, which, bringing it back, has our issues with our incumbency mood. I'm just going to keep kind of rolling through both sides of each party.
I don't know if you watched the House Judiciary Committee meeting yesterday.
I was on phone calls pretty much all day yesterday, so I was not able to.
Good. Don't go back and watch it. The only ones you really want to watch are Karen Bass of California, who seemed to be the only adult in the room, and that's a bipartisan smack. There weren't a whole lot of Republicans that, speaking as a former Republican, I would have gone, well, he did a pretty good job. I mean, it's like, whoever appoints people to the House Judiciary Committee, they must say, like, who are the biggest jerks? Let's put them on this committee. Because they'll ask the toughest questions and they don't care. They'll get the greatest hits on social media and cable news. I mean, it was really nauseating. Karen Bass was actually a credible legislator in my mind, but Bill Barr, I thought, handled himself quite well, given the velocity of the attacks on him. Couldn't even answer a question. But to me, that's just an absolute breakdown of our governing structure, when a sitting attorney general can't actually answer the questions that are being asked of him by members of the legislative branch in a public setting. It was disgusting.
I mean, those hearings are generally more for show than they are for actual policy, but which is unfortunate. And it sounds like Karen Bass was still continuing her audition for VP, which we'll find out.
Well, but here's what she didn't do. She didn't go full crazy at all. She was a respectable member of what I would consider to be what congressional behavior should be in that setting. I mean, she didn't pull punches, but she just wasn't so over the top nauseating. And it was, I mean, I think she was the only credible person out there in the from the legislative perspective. Anyway, don't want to belabor that one, because I know you probably can't say anything nice about Democrats, but I mean, if you're going to pick, really, Matt Gaetz, please, that guy, Biggs, those guys, Jordan, please. I mean, they're not helping they're helping only their team, and so they can get on Fox News and do their nightly shtick on the talk shows. It's just horrific. And then it's amplified on social media to what we were talking about earlier, Twitter and Facebook, and I don't see it getting any better anytime soon.
Well, not depressing now.
Well, I mean, you got to go poll this stuff. I mean, it's just what I see. But I came from a different era when people are supposed to work and get along and get things done and make things better. It was a weird time.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of voters who want to see that. Kind of the frustration at the dysfunction in government it had been a top concern throughout 2017 and 2018. And I think kind of the news of the day, the economy and the coronavirus has kind of pushed that to the back seat, but there's still an underlying push, especially among independents and soft partisans on both sides, who are really just looking for government to kind of get its act together and get things done.
Probably 85% of us. Okay. Polling shows that it's 85% of people who actually want to get things done. and want their political leaders to compromise to get things done. In the same poll, however, 84% said they don't want their values being compromised.
And it's more of those people that vote in primaries.
Right.
Which, with the polarization, that's where most of the battles are taking place, at least until redistricting happens, and then the entire map gets shuffled around, and we'll see how that goes.
I'm still not hopeful. The only thing I'm hopeful for is that people are moving out of the cities and changing their votes when they get out there, wherever they're moving to in this pandemic. I mean, I just see hundreds of thousands of people moving. I don't know where they're moving to or what they're going to do when they get there politically.
Yeah. That's
what pollsters like you are for.
We're working.
Find them and figure out what they're going to do. Amanda Iovino, thanks for joining us again every other Wednesday here on Virginia Free TV. Thanks to What's Next Virginia for helping us put this together. And we look forward to your next slide deck where we can drill down on independence in the economy and women and how they break out on the economy as well. Thanks, Amanda. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.